Americans generally show great respect for their troops, and rightfully so. But what is the history of the U.S. Armed Forces? How did the American military come about? The answers to these questions might not be as straightforward as you might think. The American military-industrial complex, as one former president once called it, was not always so streamlined and efficient. It began more or less as a ragtag bunch of colonialists and revolutionaries who struggled with some of the most fundamental concepts of military discipline. Nevertheless, this ragtag group ultimately shook off the yoke of the British Empire and forged an independent nation. In this audiobook, we take a look at America's military might from its inception to the present day. We explore the beginnings of both pre- and post-revolutionary America, the Mexican-American War, the Civil War, the Spanish-American War, the World Wars, the wars in Korea and Vietnam, the War on Terror, and more. The American military is still considered a force to be reckoned with, and its story is one that continues to be written about. In this audiobook, you will learn about the following: the interesting origin of the U.S. Armed Forces, the participation of American militias in the Revolutionary War, armed conflict during the Civil War, America's participation in the World Wars, how America was involved in the Cold War conflict, the War on Terror and how it influenced world politics, how America's military advanced throughout the years, and much more. Here's an excerpt from the audiobook. The American military had some rather humble beginnings, but it would ultimately evolve into the greatest fighting force the world has ever known. In some ways, such words might sound like hyperbole, but when one considers the power of the United States, one can't help but realize the impactful role the U.S. military plays in that. Chapter 1: Queen Anne's War and the French and Indian War. Soldiers, when committed to a task, can't compromise. It's unrelenting devotion to the standards of duty and courage, absolute loyalty to others, not letting the task go until it's been done. John Keegan. It's important to examine the American military's colonial roots prior to the establishment of the United States. The colonial armies, which were under British administration, were the immediate forerunners of what would become the fully fledged independent U.S. Armed Forces. And one of the first major conflicts to involve the colonial forces of America was Queen Anne's War. This was an ongoing conflict between Britain, France, and Spain. The war was called such because the reigning British monarch of the time was Queen Anne. And since the American colonies belonged to Britain, it makes sense that the American colonial forces were mobilized to fight this war on behalf of Queen Anne. The hostilities first erupted in the year 1701 with the ill-fated War of the Spanish Succession, which was waged in Europe after the passing of the Spanish monarch, King Charles II. Soon, hostilities erupted in North America, with Spanish-controlled Florida skirmishing with the nearby British-controlled colony, then known as the Province of Carolina. The North was a theater of war between the British colony of New England and the northeast coast and French holdings in Acadia, Quebec, and Newfoundland. The war really took off when French and British colonists began to engage in hostilities over their respective hegemony over the Mississippi River. These intrigues led to both the British and the French forging various alliances with local Native American tribes in an effort to offset their adversaries. There were not too many heavily fortified locations in these early years, save perhaps for some well-developed outposts like the Spanish town of St. Augustine or the British port of New York. For the most part, much of America was still in an underdeveloped state. The nation was a sprawling, rural landscape, pocketed with thick wilderness areas. Unlike the state parks of today, these pristine environments